Okay, I'm back. Back for part three, and part three should be pretty short. Well, of course, you already know that because you already see the length of the video. But anyway, so I'm starting off pretty much where we left off in part two, um, uh, talking about natural selection, and we're starting off here with uh, slide number 83. So natural selection uh, increases the frequencies of alleles that enhance or increase survival and reproduction. And adaptive evolution, evolution that improves the species, occurs then according to the degree to which a species is well suited for life and its environment improves. In other words, adaptive evolution is going to occur, uh, um, according to whether or not a species becomes more well suited for its environment. Um, but an environment can change, so adaptive evolution then may have to, if an environment changes, if an environment is really dry for a number of years, then adaptive evolution will help species adapt to that dryness. But then if the environment suddenly becomes more moist, then adaptive evolution is going to have to move that species in the opposite direction and get them to be able to handle more moist conditions. So being able to be well suited to the environment is kind of a moving target since the environment is changing periodically. So then to kind of reiterate, genetic drift and the bottleneck effect, which is just a type of genetic drift, are random, and so don't consistently increase frequency of alleles that enhance survival and reproduction. So both of these processes, genetic drift and bottleneck, can either increase or decrease the frequency of beneficial alleles. Because genetic drift and bottleneck effect are actually working at random. That they're random changes. So then, by definition, they're either going to increase or decrease, beneficial alleles at random. Sexual selection. So individuals with certain inherited characteristics are more likely to acquire mates than other individuals. And we'll see a good example of this. Sexual selection can cause sexual dimorphism. Morph means form. So dimorphism means two different forms. In other words, the male has one distinct form and the female has another very distinct form. For example, in peacocks, the male, actually the male is called the peacock and the female is called the peahen, actually, peacock and peahen. But anyway, the male is very different than the female, so that's a good example of sexual dimorphism. So there's different types of sexual selection then, intra-sexual selection and intersexual selection. Remember, intra means, within the same group or same kind or whatever, and inter means between different ones. Like something that's international is between different nations. So intersexual is between the different sexes. So let's look at intrasexual first. So it's direct competition among individuals of one sex, often the males, for mates of the opposite sex. So individuals of one sex compete for mates of the opposite sex. That's intrasexual, selection. Intersexual selection then is often called mate choice because individuals of one sex, usually females, are choosy in selecting their mates from another sex. Intersexual. And so the showiness of male appearance can increase a male's chances of attracting a female, but while also decreasing his chances of selection. Because if a male is really showy, well, then he's going to be noticeable to predators as well as noticeable to females of his own species. So it's kind of a trade-off in some ways. What's nice, though, with the peacock is that, when there's a female present, he can he can fluff out the feathers and be really noticeable. But then other times when predators might be watching, he can fold those wings, those feathers up and be a little less conspicuous anyway. But so how do female preferences evolve? There's a good genes hypothesis that that if a trait is related to male genetic quality, both the male trait and the female preference for that trait should increase in frequency. Natural selection should increase them in frequency in the population. Here's an experiment. They recorded the male's call, recorded of an SC male's call and recording of a LC male's call, and the female then and then they crossed eggs and sperm of all of them. So they got offspring of an SC father and offspring of an LC father, and they found that in terms of larval survival, LC was better in 1995, but no significant difference in 1996. Larval growth was better for the LC in 1996. Time to metamorphosis was shorter. So mating with an LC male was actually beneficial in terms of the SC male. Now, selection can be balancing. Diploidy. Diploidy means having two chromosomes of a chromosome pair. Having chromosomes in pairs rather than having just one chromosome from each pair. Most eukaryotes are diploid. Basically, they have diploid. And so diploidy maintains genetic variation in the form of recessive alleles that are hidden from selection in the heterozygote form. So basically, then recessive alleles can be hidden in the heterozygotes, and so they're less likely to be selected against. Balancing selection is an interesting phenomenon. It's when natural selection maintains a stable frequencies of two or more phenotypes in a population. And we'll look at an example. Balancing selection can be frequency dependent, and it also can maybe in some cases the heterozygote can have an advantage. So in frequency dependent selection, the fitness of a phenotype depends on how common it is in the population. So a good example of that is frequency dependent selection that produces approximately equal numbers of right-mouthed and left-mouthed scale-eating fish. So there are small fish that eat the scales off other fish, and there's ones where some of them have mouths that point to the left, others have mouths that point to the right. And so, basically, if one of them gets a little bit too frequent, then they'll decrease, but if the other one gets too frequent, they'll decrease, and so on. Because if you have more if you have more right-mouthed ones than left-mouthed ones, well, that means that the right-mouthed ones are going to have to compete a lot more for the right side of the fish that they eat off of, and the left ones won't have much competition at all, which means that the left ones will probably increase in number relative to the right-hand ones, and so on. And if there's more left ones around, well, then they're going to have to compete more with each other for the left side or for the right side of the fish, and the right-mouthed ones won't have as much competition, and so they will increase relative to the left-mouthed. So in that way they balance each other out. So now there could be a heterozygote advantage. If the heterozygote form has a higher fitness than both of the homozygote form. And we'll see a good example of this. So natural selection will tend to maintain 2 or more alleles at that locus if the heterozygote has advantages. And heterozygote advantage can result from either stabilizing selection or directional selection, like we saw just a few slides ago. So let's look at an example of a case where the heterozygote has a definite advantage. A mutation in an allele that codes for part of the hemoglobin protein causes what we call sickle cell disease. And so sickle cell disease is a negative, but also this allele confers malaria resistance. And this allele is found in people. So in regions where malaria is common, selection actually favors heterozygote people that are heterozygote for the sickle cell allele. And let's look at that in a little more detail then. So basically the sickle cell allele on a chromosome means that an adenine replaces a thymine. So this is the gene for sickle cell disease, and this is the gene for non-sickle cell disease, so the wild type allele. And so sickle cell hemoglobin then, under low oxygen conditions, the protein fibers in the sickle cell hemoglobin causes the red blood cells to be sickle shaped. And that reduces their ability to carry oxygen. And also they tend to bunch up when they're going to the capillaries. But normal hemoglobin does not aggregate into fibers. And so red blood cells keep their normal shape, and they move just fine through the capillaries. So in a number of parts of the world, there's a lot of malaria, and so the frequencies of the sickle cell allele are greatest where malaria is greatest, because the heterozygotes are more likely to survive malaria. When the red blood cells change into that sickle cell shape, that decreases their malaria, because malaria is actually a protist parasite that gets into the red blood cells. So now you're probably thinking, well, hey, natural selection has such great effects. Maybe natural selection could actually produce the perfect organism. Well, there are a few reasons why natural selection, unfortunately, can't produce a perfect organism. First of all, selection can act only on existing variations. Selection can only act on the variation that's there. If there aren't any really good variations, then it can't act on them. Also, evolution is limited by historical constraints. What's happened in the past and past genes that are being carried on through history. Also, adaptations are often compromises. You saw that with the sickle cell disease situation. And then chance, natural selection, and the environment will interact. So chance is always an element in this, and chance is not always going to be working in the best interest of a population. Another thing I think I'll add here that's not really in the textbook. Another thing that's a drawback to natural selection is that if a mutation causes just a slightly disadvantageous trait, a trait that's slightly disadvantageous, just slightly harmful, is hard for natural selection to actually remove from a population. if a trait is really harmful, extremely harmful, well, natural selection is going to work very quickly, very easily, and just get rid of that trait from the population. But if a trait is only slightly harmful, natural selection is not really going to be able to work very efficiently against that slightly harmful trait. And by the time that natural selection could eliminate that slightly harmful trait, another slightly harmful trait will come along as well and add to it. And so, natural selection is by far not the perfect thing that'll ever really produce a perfect organism. And the other thing is, remember, like we've mentioned a number of times before, natural selection is helping a population be adapted to the environment in its current form. But once the environment changes, then natural selection is going to have to move the population in another direction. So anyway, that's chapter 23. Now, as always, remember, check your emails and your announcements every day. And also, if you have any questions about any of this information and material that we're covering, let me know. I'll be happy to answer any questions. So sometime tomorrow or the next day, I think I will actually be putting up part 1 of the lecture for chapter 24 as well. So until then, keep working, keep studying, keep doing the labs and the discussion questions, and we will see you again very soon. Thanks.